Hello and welcome. Ferries are to the fore in conversations in most Scottish islands, and all too often it's about the lack of them. We're clearly a long way behind our neighbours in Norway and Faroe. And indeed, the Norwegians and the Faroese are also a long way ahead of us in an alternative to ferries, linking up small islands by tunnels. The subject of tunnels has been raised from time to time over the years, but it's never quite taken off. But now in Shetland, the Islands Council is looking seriously at the possibility of linking 4 islands to the Shetland mainland. And one man who has long had a vision for tunnels as a means of transforming Scottish Islands transport is here with me today. He's Andy Sloan. He's managing director of the consulting firm COWI in the UK and Ireland. COWI is a global engineering consultancy with its headquarters in Denmark. And he's also a visiting professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at Strathclyde University, and he's a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. He's an engineering geologist by training through the universities of Edinburgh and Leeds. He's a chartered engineer. He's a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, and he's also a member of that elite group who have climbed the Old Man of Hoy. Andy works in the fields of infrastructure development and renewable energy, specializing in the development of underground space. He's worked on tunnels and caverns around the world for infrastructure development, for mining, for science, for water and power. And he's the ideal person to tell us what might be possible for tunnels for the Scottish Islands. Andy, welcome. And I mentioned Norway and Faroe. Can I start with the context of Europe generally and ask you, what's the general European situation for the construction of subsea tunnels rather than persevering with traditional ferry services?
Well, thanks for the introduction, Howie, and I have to say I could no longer climb the Old Man of Hall. That was several decades ago. And the general situation with crossing large bodies of water by tunnels is to the fore. It's booming in the European context. But there are two types of tunnel, sort of big complex tunnels like the Silvertown tunnels in London, which have just been completed, and we did the design for that, and Lower Thames crossing, which is in the news at the moment, a second crossing parallel to the M25, or the Fehmarn Belt in between Denmark and Germany. These are mega projects connecting large bodies of population with large volumes of traffic. Another set of tunnels are really what we're talking about today, which are generally lower volume of traffic in more rural areas like potentially Shetland or Orkney, but certainly parts of Norway and the Faroe Islands to which you refer. So those types of tunnel are being constructed really in the northern part of Europe, in the Faroes and in Norway and indeed at Iceland as well. So there is a kind of industry building these tunnels in northern Europe.
I'm wondering, what are the advantages that are driving this?
Well, the advantages of connecting islands and an archipelago of islands, and that's distinct from, say, connecting Orkney to the mainland, but concentrating on intra-island connectivity of an archipelago. Really, we can look at the Faroe Islands and say, what are the benefits that have accrued to that country through the connection? And they built 4 significant subsea tunnels, and another one, a very long one, 22 kilometers, is in planning. So the Faroe Islands have very good data on what's happened to their economy and to the nature of the population there post connection by tunnels. And in general terms, they see a decrease in the age of the population of a connected island. They see an increase in household income from a connected island. So this indicates that a connected island becomes more vibrant, becomes better connected to Tórshavn, the capital city, where people can work and travel to perhaps an island where they grew up as a kid. Faroe has seen an increase in the population of 10% over the last while. And whether it's down to tunnels or not, but anecdotally talking to politicians, and I was with the CEO of Landsverk last week in the Faroe, they see Faroe as a more attractive place for people to move to. So maybe they've gone to Denmark and moved back after a few years on the mainland of Europe. It becomes more attractive. So they're very proud of their connectivity. And the political vision was that within all of the main population centres within the Faroes, they should be within 1 hour of car journey from Tórshavn, where previously there were fjords to be crossed and boats, etc. And they're well on that way, on that journey to have that connectivity. And of course, it may mean that on some of the connected islands, some things disappear that were there already, but because maybe local health centre, whatever, but what they've developed on a centre where people move to is a bigger and better facility. So it's a journey that they're going on, and it's taken ambition and political will to take them down this route. So looking at that, I've always felt that in Scotland, there is no reason, if there was a political will and communities felt that there was a will and they wanted to be connected, they couldn't explore the benefits of being connected by fixed link tunnels. And, you know, at COWI, we design the biggest bridges in the world, but some of the distances that we're talking about in connecting our islands, and they're not that big from a tunnelling perspective, but they're indeed very big from a bridge perspective. And that's why you go towards tunnels in this instance.
And the economics will be this big factor, isn't it? You're speaking of bringing together small islands into an economic unity. So socially and economically, you're getting something that's more vibrant, that can grow. But it's just that capital cost, because it seems that, say, in Faroe, it can be quite small islands, I guess, with, it seems, the population, you know, in the hundreds rather than the thousands. And it seems to be economically viable to put that level of capital investment in.
Yeah. So they're not quite connecting islands with hundreds. The next tunnel is to Suðuroy, I believe, from memory, the population there is about 5,000 people. But it is a 22-kilometre tunnel, so it's a huge undertaking, and that's in planning at the moment. Yeah, seen through the lens of the central belt of Scotland or the north of England and big population centres, it seems, you know, why would you invest all of this money? And it seems an expensive thing to do, to connect small populations of people on separate islands. My take on that is that there's a political decision to be made. Do we want to protect and enhance beautiful places like Orkney, Shetland, and perhaps Western Isles, and grow those places for the greater good of themselves and for the benefit of the whole of Scotland and the UK? I would think, yes, that's a good thing to do. And then it comes down to, well, is there a political will to do that? Now, clearly the landscape in the UK at the moment is there isn't that much money around to spend on investment, and central government, particularly Westminster, are looking at private finance and whether there's a route to private finance. So that is the nub of the question. Can private finance, and there'll always be some public finance that needs to prime the pumps to get private finance involved. So there's a big question. Can we in Scotland, in our rural communities, with the help and backstop of governments raise private finance to invest in these sorts of infrastructure. Now, they've done it in Faroe, so they've raised private finance to build these tunnels. And I think it's certainly worth exploring that within Scotland with a degree of focus that we haven't done before. So the answer might be no, but we don't know that yet. So why not give it a damn good go and see if we can raise the money?
And the big bonus with this is this growth, this social and economic growth, isn't it? Because with a ferry link, you're always going to have a cap on what you can do. There's only a certain amount of trips that a ferry can do back and forth each day with a finite number of passengers. And whereas with a tunnel, it can greatly grow. And the pattern seems to have been wherever they've invested in a tunnel, that indeed the traffic has really grown.
Yeah, I mean, at COWI, we weren't involved in the design and construction of the ferries tunnels, but we were involved in early planning and looking at the traffic flows and the impact. The data from Faroe shows that in some instances, it's the traffic is almost a tenfold increase from the traffic or from the ferry transportation of vehicles. So there's been a huge increase just because it's there. So you're almost got an infinite ferry, you know, it's back and forward an infinite number of times a day. Complete that, and that's the connectivity that you get from a tunnel. So people just get used to going to the shops or go to the leisure centre or whatever. It just becomes easier to do, and that ease of connectivity is certainly not going to inhibit inward investment in terms of jobs and businesses and tourism, all of that sort of stuff.
And this leads us to Orkney, because you'd mentioned long tunnels linking in islands of several thousand people. Now in Orkney, we've got islands of several hundreds, but the distances between the islands and each other and the islands and the mainland are much shorter. I mean, just looking at Orkney, are there particular routes, or what kind of potential do you think Orkney would have?
So I'm not an expert in Orkney in terms of the geography or the population centres. I mean, I was involved many years ago in the feasibility of a tunnel from east of Kirkwall to Shaughnessy, to the island via the island in the middle there. So it's a tunnel, then use the spoil to create a causeway to from the small island in the middle of the Sound there across to Shaughnessy. And that was 2 decades ago. So what if you wanted to explore this more, it's really about looking at the socio-economic viability of connecting these low population islands. So you'd have to go through the formal process. What has changed, the landscape seems to be changing slightly in that the Chancellor in London has suggested that there should be a review of what's called the Green Book, the Treasury Rule Book, around the cost-benefit assessment of things like tunnels or infrastructure in general, and allowing developers to look at more of the economic advantage and bringing that into the overall assessment and diluting the focus at the moment, which is really on journey times. So it's difficult to say where and how viable they are. It really would take a proper appraisal of the individual situations to see which ones would be possible or not.
And I'm just picturing that description for Shaughnessy. That'll be the little island of Helier-Home. So you'd put the tunnel from the just outside Kirkwall. You put a tunnel to Helier-Home, and then use the spoil from the excavation to link Helier-Home to Shaughnessy.
Yep, yeah, we did that study. It must be 20 years ago for the council. Yeah.
Now, the big one at the moment in the news is Shetland, and it really seems that they've been doing a lot of the groundwork and are moving forward to the next stage of investigation.
Yes, the socio-economic studies being done at the moment, led by Stantec, and we're in that team along with Mott MacDonald. Mott are looking at the ferries, and we're looking at the tunnels. And there's 4 tunnels in that study being taken forward. So we're looking at the alignment of those tunnels. And for those of you who know Shetland, it's between Bressa and Lerwick, and then the mainland and Walsall, and then between the mainland and Yell, and so those four connections. And basically, the study at the moment is to inform the council as to what is the preferred option for each one of these. Is it bridge? Unlikely. Enhanced services, ferry services, or fixed link by tunnel. So it's a comparative analysis, looking at which ones are the best solution, and that'll be presented to the council in relation to, and for them to decide and take things forward. But interestingly, yesterday they decided to look at tunnels in a bit more detail to inform this outline business case process, the socio-economic process. And that's really to dive deeper into how would Shetland actually deliver the tunnel? So what would Shetland Island Council need to become in terms of a delivery agent? Take one tunnel and develop the design a bit further, and then market test that with contractors. Because we don't really know whether people would come to Shetland or Orkney to build a tunnel. You know, there's an assumption there that it would. I think they would, but we need to actually prove it. So some soft testing with contractors that would come and build it. And then look at the thorny issue that you raised earlier of finance. So the council are going to explore whether it is feasible or not. It would be a terrible situation, would it not, if they went through this whole process and said, yeah, we're going to build a tunnel, and then it turned out that no one wanted to build one, or they couldn't raise the finance. So I think it's a very sensible decision for them at this juncture to take it on a little bit further, so that it really, the councils there have the best information on which they can base their important decision on later on this year into I think early next year. So it's exciting, it's interesting. And it really hasn't been done in this detail before in Scotland.
And then the third of Scotland's big island groups, the Western Isles. And I noticed that a number of years ago, you'd written quite a visionary article about the potential for tunnels to link up some of these islands with the neighbours.
Yeah, I wrote that article because I was approached by members of Parliament, a member of Parliament out there, a bit like this, to say, what is there a potential? Look, from an engineering perspective, all these connections, and again, I'm talking about inside, linking tunnels within the archipelago, it's feasible. From an engineering perspective, that's not the challenge. We can build the tunnels. It is whether the local communities want to be connected, and if that's the case, it's about the money, it's about the finance. So it's not, when people talk about the feasibility of these tunnels, they're eminently feasible from an engineering perspective. It's really the social impact and and raising the finance that's the question. So these are political questions and not for simple engineers like me.
Do you think that now, indeed, the time is now to look really seriously across Scotland at tunnels? Do you think perhaps that all the problems of ferries, the mounting cost of constructing some ferries, the running costs of ferry routes, do you think that could be pointing us in the direction that, as we've said, the Norwegians and the Faroese have long been going in terms of tunnels?
I think the future's a mix. I think, you know, ferries are great. I'm talking to you from Arran, for example, now, and so rely on ferries. So I think the future is a real. I think we owe it to ourselves to look at a mixture going forward of tunnel fixed links, increased connectivity for where that is the best option. Most of the routes will still be connected by ferries, I would suggest. But where there is the possibility and where people want to be connected, I think we owe it to ourselves to at least have a really good look at it. But I have a feeling, Howie, if we build one in Scotland, we'll build plenty. But I mean, that in itself, the Faroese have made an industry out of this. So the Norwegian tunnelling industry is big, and we could have the same in Scotland. I mean, the techniques are being used at the moment in Scotland because SSE are developing the COWI class hydroelectric scheme up the Great Glen, and we're designing that for them. And the techniques that are being deployed, and there's an adit down under the Monroe there, just finished, and the techniques employed there in Scotland would exactly the same techniques as we would use in the inter-island tunnels by drilling and blasting.
So the expertise is there, the resources are there, and the potential is there.
Yep. Yep. It's all, from an engineering perspective, it's all doable. Yeah. So it's and what we're not doing is replicating the Clyde Tunnel and all that complexity with high traffic volumes. So the engineering is essentially pared back. It's still safe, etc., etc. But you just don't need as much stuff in the tunnel when there's fewer cars, and it's really that which drives the engineering, mechanical and electrical provisions that we put in the tunnel.
Andy, that is absolutely fascinating. I'm looking forward to hearing what the developments are and looking forward to hopefully welcoming you back in the future with news of progress. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.